everybody. I am the final speaker for the conference. I am standing between you and your final happy hour of the weekend. So I apologize for that, and I will try to go quickly. But I got excited about a couple of things that I heard over the past couple of days. One of them that I wanted to address, it was a question for FIRE Senior Fellow Jacob Mishingama about why we think freedom of speech is under threat and what factors lead to freedom of speech being under threat. My Substack is called The Eternally Radical Idea because freedom of speech is a radical idea in every generation. Because I always point out, and people think I'm going to say, in every generation people stand up to support freedom of speech. No, they don't. The one predictable thing is in every generation people stand up to oppose freedom of speech. And they're generally on the winning side. So in every generation, freedom of speech is a radical idea. And we were incredibly lucky to grow up at a time in which free speech law and free speech culture were on the ascendance. So in some cases, we're sort of reverting to the mean. But I wrote a short book, a tiny, tiny, wee little book, but Richard Dawkins liked it, called Freedom from Speech in 2014, where I talked about this idea of, because I wanted to kind of square the circle between my friend Steven Pinker, who's on our advisory council, that I do actually believe, all things being equal, most things in life are actually getting better, but that there's a category of things that get worse precisely because everything's getting better. Not despite the fact everything is getting better, but because everything else is getting better. And I called them problems of comfort in freedom from speech in 2014, and me and Haidt called it problems of progress in Coddling the American Mind, which came out in 2018. And that basically is the idea that freedom of speech, inquiry, scientific method, all of these things, they're difficult and they're painful. And progress is largely about being able to escape pain, to be able to, there's this idea of the post-material society that Ronald Engelhardt talked about, where essentially the beautiful future we're looking for is everybody gets to live in communities that better reflect their values. Well, we now live in communities where people are surrounded pretty strictly by people who respect their values. And it has a lot of downsides, and very predictable ones. So here's my point, what I'm trying to get at freedom of speech. I think the threats to freedom of speech are the predictable results of other things getting better. So you better hope in a lot of ways the threats to freedom of speech get worse, or at least the pressure against it gets worse, because that would mean that we'd had some kind of disaster or something like that. But we have to be ready for this, because a lot of times people talk cyclically, as if, well, last time we went crazy in the first great age of political correctness, 1985 to 1995, oh, we all got better. We all fixed it. I'm here to tell you, no, we didn't. I started my career in 2001 and was screaming to high heaven trying to explain to people, no, all that stuff that you remember from the 80s and 90s that you thought went away, it's being kept alive and it's being advanced and they're coming up with new horrible ideas among the administrators. And it came back with a vengeance so that everyone could see around 2014. So this fight is not going to be over, and it might actually get worse. And I think it's really important for people to understand it. The other factor is institutional decay. Institutional decay is normal, particularly institutions like academia that aren't like businesses. They just die and recreate themselves over and over again. Institutions that live on forever, that basically become immortal, get all sorts of problems that develop with them. And we are currently facing a very serious problem of institutional decay, where something has turned into something that looks a lot more like a racket. Before I get to the new data, so one thing that was cool that we were able to do right before I got here was Comey German, Comey Frey, sorry, that's she doesn't like to be called that anymore. Sean Stevens, Nate Honeycutt. We all put together the data, the latest data on cancel culture, on professor cancellation. So I'm going to be introducing some new data tonight. But one of the reasons why I'm considering doing a symposium on knowledge creation is just the idea that we're at an especially desperate period where I'm terrified that the same people who messed up the process of knowledge creation in academia and in journalism are going to be the ones deciding what knowledge is for the operating system of the species, also known as AI. That's terrifying. Think about every dumb idea you heard in academia actually being treated forevermore as if it's objective truth. That's why it is a crucial, crucial moment right now. So I'm going to get to my, oh yeah. So I always like to, one of the reasons why we really have to take this seriously, one of the things I'm really trying to burn in people's heads, because people say lately I just sound so pessimistic. And I'm not trying to sound pessimistic. I'm by temperament an optimist. I'm just trying to get people concerned about how serious the problem is. When we did a massive survey of faculty, 1 in 6 professors, 1 in 6, said they'd either been threatened with punishment or actually punished for their research, pedagogy, or speech. There is no historical comparison to that, none. One of the things I did that actually didn't end up making it into Canceling of the American Mind, because I'm a masochist, was I did a massive study of different historical moments in the history of censorship. And so like, for example, does anybody have a guess that at the time of McCarthyism, the biggest study that was conducted during McCarthyism, right at the end of McCarthyism, how many communist professors lost their jobs? 100 is normally the estimate, and that's the one that they came up with for professors overall. When it came to communist professors, it was about 62. That's bad. That's a bad number. The argument was that they were too doctrinaire to be allowed to teach kids, and that essentially they would try to indoctrinate them. They actually made the argument that these professors were a threat to academic freedom, but it's nonetheless scandalous that these professors lost their jobs. How many professors do you think lost their job in the wake of 9/11 and through the Iraq War? 207. 3. And all 3 of them, because the thing about McCarthyism, it's important to understand, is that's before the law applied. So in some ways, we're comparing this to McCarthyism doesn't make any sense, because it wasn't until 1957 that you actually start having law that says you can't fire professors for their political beliefs. That's a case called Sweezy v. New Hampshire. So really, the best comparison is post-1957, and the biggest explosion of professors getting fired not during wartime was right after 9/11 and going into the Iraq War. And it was 3, and all 3 of them, by the way, actually did things that you could fire someone for. So it was Ward Churchill, he was fired actually for massive academic dishonesty and plagiarism. There was another professor, Elizabeth Ito, who was fired for taking 10 minutes out of her 15-minute technical writing class to talk about the Iraq War, even though she was doing a technical writing class, and they can actually fire you for that. That's not doing your job. And then the last one was Sami Al-Arian, someone we defended at Fire, and rightfully, because they were trying to fire him for his speech. What it actually turned out, what they wanted to fire him for was his connections with actual Islamic terrorism groups. So he was arrested eventually. He was put in prison. He was sent back to hang out with the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's all real. So basically 0 for pure speech. 1 in 6 is extrapolated nationally about 100,000 to 150,000 professors, and these are the ones that we don't know about. This is kind of like the world of the unknown. The ones we've actually documented, well, this is our Scholars Under Fire database, and we just updated the data. And you can see just how much worse it's gotten. And we noticed something really dramatic starting to happen around 2014. Everything I've written about has 2014. But you'll notice they didn't start going after the professors yet. And that was something that took a certain amount of chutzpah. Because in 2017, suddenly, and students think this is normal, and I get really agitated when they think this is normal. It is not historically normal for students to sign petitions to get their professors fired for their academic findings or speech. It's bizarre, it's shameful, it's messed up. It's not something that generally happened prior to really recently. And it was 2017 where they finally got up the nerve to not start not just canceling their classmates, but to start really going after professors in large numbers, and it really accelerated. 2020, that barely conveys how bad it was. So this is our total scholar database. So the first spike was after 2016, really 2017, and the second spike was really post George Floyd. So this is what I call cancel culture. My definition of cancel culture is the uptick of campaigns to get people fired, deplatformed, or otherwise punished for speech that would be protected under the First Amendment. And I mean that as an analog to the First Amendment, and really more of an analog to public employee law. Because in many cases you're talking about places where the First Amendment doesn't apply, but First Amendment standards make a great deal of sense, and they really help you sort of understand this, and the culture of fear that resulted from it. So this is the big escalation of cancellation attempts against professors, which was unlike anything I'd seen in my career, because I thought it was pretty bad prior to 2013. I had no idea what I was in for. So this is some of the breakdown. So the final data is about 1,200 cancellation attempts against professors. So once again, McCarthyism was about 11 years. It was 1947 to 1957. We finally got to the 11 years of cancel culture. And the number, like I said, it was about 62 communist professors fired, about 100 professors overall. We're well over twice that in terms of professors fired that we know of. According to that 1 in 6 data, we know it's way, way worse than that. So again, when people try to play this down, it's like, this is insane. You can't find a comparison to this. So one of the reasons why I was originally planning to write a follow-up to Coddling the American Mind with my awesome young co-author, Ricky Schlott. I wanted to have something from the point of view of a Gen Z young woman about the threats to mental health coming off campus. But then I had to listen to like Michael Hobbs, still saying cancel culture is like a myth. And I'm like, this is insane, and it should be something people are deeply ashamed to say, because they're saying they don't give a damn about these fired professors. They don't give a damn about professors. And the funny thing is, I'm like, listen, if you just want to care about professors on the left, I've got news for you. Plenty of professors on the left actually got canceled. Just care about that. Sure, be unprincipled, but still care about it. Don't pretend none of this ever happened, because that's why nobody actually trusts you anymore. So meanwhile, things started to improve slightly for professor cancellations in 2022, 2023. And right at the same time, deplatformings went through the roof. Deplatformings are, when you get speakers shouted down, or is the worst version of it, the mob censorship attempts. But also, otherwise get speakers canceled, physically block people from going into them. You prevent speakers from coming to your campus. 2023 was the worst year on record that we were familiar with until last year. 2024 is the worst year we know of in history for campus deplatforming. And it was overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian students. And FIRE has defended plenty of pro-Palestinian students, plenty of pro-Palestinian professors, but I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that they were, except I think 3 examples, and those were the other 3 were also from the left, they were exclusively responsible for the shoutdowns. And at a level that we've never seen on campus when it comes to disrupting speeches, including one. It was a Jewish professor who was giving a presentation on black holes. I would have loved to have gone to that talk. But a Jewish professor, he supports Israel, so, they're not anti-Jewish, they're anti-Zionist. So, deplatforming. So yeah, worst year that we've seen. I can send everybody this new data, but yeah, it's been pretty harrowing lately. And this is deplatforming since cancel culture. Now, what's funny about the deplatforming since cancel culture is that overwhelmingly, like what you're talking about, is that most universities responded to it by just really discouraging students from inviting controversial people in the first place. But that wasn't good enough. It was even back in 2014. I think Harry Enton did an analysis of commencement speakers, and I don't think found like a single Republican invited like that that year, maybe one. So they've gotten more small c conservative on who they invite in the first place, and they're still having unparalleled levels of speaker cancellations. So this is more the deplatforming according to political direction. Now, one thing that and FIRE is a truly nonpartisan organization. I mean, like right now, actually, we just announced a lawsuit. You guys hear about that case where Ann Selzer, where Trump was suing Ann Selzer because she had that Iowa poll that ended up being really, really wrong? Well, it was a really bad poll. She explained how she got those bad results, but Trump decided to sue her under a Consumer Protection Act of Iowa, I think, or something like that. And we're representing Ann in the case against Trump. And the idea of taking on Trump directly in court, is like, no, that's because we took on the administration all the time, but this is new territory. So we get hate mail from everybody. And we do point out that for a lot of the cancellations and deplatforming of professors, that sometimes those do actually emerge from the right. There's an incredible case at Babson College, for example, where it was covered in Fox News as if, oh my God, this lefty professor, he's telling the Ayatollah of Iran that he should bomb the following sites in the United States. He's advising him on where to bomb in the United States. And this was during the period in which Trump was saying that he was willing to bomb historic parts of Iran when there was some brinkmanship going on there. And I saw what the story was about. It was a tweet by this professor saying, hey, Ayatollah Khomeini, this guy's Middle Eastern, Khomeini's long dead. Maybe here's a list of cultural sites in the US you should probably bomb. Mall of America, Kardashian residence. Actually, like, not even a bad joke as far as I was concerned. But it got picked up on right-wing media as if he was literally advising, and the guy lost his job. Now, but one thing I want to be clear here is even in those cases, the administrators who usually do the firing are still on the left. So it's not just that people are getting fired for saying things that are, aren't cool with people who are woke. An awful lot of the firing is apolitical. But it is the case that if administrators were still good on academic freedom and free speech, none of this would be happening at all. But they're not, and actually they're a huge part of the problem. Sometimes people misunderstand one of the points that we made in Coddling the American Mind. That as if what I was saying was, or what we were saying was, that the problem prior to 2014 was just administrators, and then it became just students. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the problem was administrators, the problem is administrators. But what happened in 2014 was the administrators were given this wonderful opportunity meeting a cohort of much more intolerant students who they could then work with. So a lot of these shout downs, a lot of these things that you see, a lot of these cancellation attempts, they're often facilitated, encouraged by administrators. At my alma mater, Stanford Law, the reason why finally an administrator got fired for organizing one of these things, this was the shout down of Kyle Duncan, a Fifth Circuit judge back in 2023, was because she decided that she needed to be the star of the show. After organizing it, so they did a perfectly 10-minute shout down, she gets up, unfolds her pre-written speech, talking about how is the juice of free speech worth the squeeze of the pain your presence is causing? And she did actually get fired, but that's just because usually administrators don't actually, give speeches on camera, making themselves the star of the show. So I think every single time one of these things happens, there needs to be an independent investigation. They need to find out, did administrators do anything to stop the cancellation? And if they didn't, they should be punished in some way. Or did they do anything to encourage it? And if they did anything to encourage it, they should be fired. So, yeah, and we've seen an awful lot of stuff around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, of course, recently. That's always interesting to figure out, like, what that actually means from a political standpoint. I feel like one of the reasons why it's had such an impact on campuses is because when it's just left versus right on campus, the left wins. But I think the Israeli-Palestinian one has been such a nasty conflict on campus, in part because it's an inter-left fight, making it more ferocious. So this is something that, this is some research. I don't know if you guys saw this. I did something on the eternally radical idea about this study. these are the things that students think professors should be reported for arguing in class. And so I've watched kind of like, I call it the perfect rhetorical fortress in Canceling of the American Mind. Like this series of dodges you're able to use to sort of get out of taking anybody else's argument seriously. And I remember when the early data was saying something like 71% of students are self-censoring or something like that, or professors are. The argument was, or 70% said that students would report their professors. They're saying, oh, it's probably just for actual sexual harassment or for calling students racial slurs or something that showed no knowledge of what campuses are actually like. And then when, these researchers at Northern Dakota State University did a poll where they actually asked, okay, what are the things that get you reported? They're all wrong think. They're all political opinions. They are saying things like biological sex is real, or that there's only two sexes. It's saying that maybe there is no racial disparity in the number of Black Americans who get shot as opposed to white. Things that, we know the people who've actually gotten in trouble for this stuff, they admit to proudly on campus. And then, of course, some people who are here. Laura Kipnis, who remembers the Laura Kipnis case?
I was on the board of trustees when all that went down.
Oh, yeah. Well done. Yeah. Now, the thing that blows me away about the Laura Kipnis case, what bears mentioning, is that we'd been alone at FIRE, kind of pointing out how Title IX was weaponized to go after speech. It was clear as day when I started at FIRE in 2001. And finally, Laura Kipnis writes about how Title IX is being used to stifle speech on campus. She is then brought up on, I'm sorry?
Which triggered another Title IX action against her.
How did you know that? Sorry, I was gonna try to explain it actually. I'll skip it. So yeah, thanks. Jay Bhattacharya, basically that he should be reported as well for what he said. Then, of course, some disagreement on climate. So basically, what am I pointing out? All of the hot button issues in the United States, every single hot button issue in the United States, I have seen professors and students either get in trouble with, lose their job, be suspended for. What does that mean for the public's ability to trust experts on any hot button issue? They shouldn't. I don't come to this conclusion lightly, but that's the situation they've created. And the idea that you can see dunderheaded articles coming out of the scientific community kind of trying to figure out whether or not signaling your political allegiances and making sort of social justice arguments in any way harms how seriously people take science. And it's like, of course it does. You're basically saying, we're not going to be objective about this stuff. Nature Human Behavior's decision, wildly undermines science. Jonathan Rausch wrote a great piece about that for the FIRE website that you should check out. But it's just weird to see otherwise smart people not know how best to completely destroy people's trust in your expertise. Yeah, and so I love this one. 1/3 of liberal California university faculty at least somewhat willing to discriminate against conservatives in hiring. We had another one, like, would you discriminate against a Trump voter? It was like 1/4 of professors answered yes. And here's the thing, though. These are professors willing to admit that. The professors who would really actually do that, I think, is decidedly higher. But the idea that kind of like, oh yeah, sure, totally. Screw that guy. And before I get to questions, because I love questions, but I would like them to actually be questions. This is a lawsuit that we brought. So we defeated the Stop Woke Act in court. The Stop Woke Act was Ron DeSantis's attempt to sort of rein in wokeness in the state of Florida. Now, we told them this is laughably unconstitutional before it was passed. It got passed. We said, we're going to sue against this. It's laughably unconstitutional. And then we got it defeated in court because it was laughably unconstitutional. This was a requirement. This required, and I feel genuinely bad for these attorneys, this required an attorney to go into court and argue, this is constitutional, But it does mean that professors couldn't have Sotomayor come in and read her opinion defending affirmative action, but it would allow professors to criticize affirmative action. And I'm like, okay, I'm so sorry that you made a lawyer actually make that argument. Because that's basically saying, yeah, I know it's crazy unconstitutional. So, and that one particularly angers me because it set back the movement for higher ed reform years. And now there are papers all over the place basically talking about this massive right-wing campaign, new McCarthyism, all this kind of stuff, when basically you could be forgiven for thinking that there were 1,000 Stop Woke Acts passed all over the country, and there was one. There's one that's somewhat close to it, but not nearly anywhere as bad. And it massively set back. And they should have, if you're going to try to reform something, first thing, try to do something constitutional. But that got huge media attention, and rightfully. But this one has gotten basically none. In the state of California, and this is a fire lawsuit, in the state of California, as part of the community college system, they are required, all professors are required to work in concepts like intersectionality, anti-racism, into their syllabuses, into their classrooms. Obviously, it's implied that they're supposed to work them in favorably into their classroom. This is a chemistry professor that's suing. He got a great quote from him saying, it's like, I'm not really sure how to explain the anti-racist take on the atomic weight of boron. And what's amazing about this is that compelled speech is worse than censorship. Saying that you all your professors have to work in concepts that you may even be hostile to into your syllabus and into your class. That is tyranny. That's insane. And we're currently suing about this, but I think everybody in the country should actually know about this lawsuit because it's completely outrageous and not getting nearly enough coverage. So what are we trying to do to push back? We're trying to do a lot. And there's a lot more that we need to do. We need more and bigger ideas about how to reform higher ed. We're trying to do more hard thinking on higher ed reform. I think actually a lot of the things that are actually going to make higher ed reform are going to be counter institutions. I think that, the idea of having institutions, I don't just mean University of Austin, I mean institutions that's whole entire function is to actually point out all the holes that are currently being produced in modern scholarship, not just due to wokeness, but due to whatever, because we have badly damaged this incredibly expensive, frankly, product that is supposed to be the envy of the world, our knowledge-producing systems in the United States. We need to be thinking big. But in terms of something that FIRE does, it is big and expensive, frankly, is one of my babies. The idea of doing a rigorous ranking of schools according to freedom of speech. Now, how many people know about the campus free speech ranking? Okay, I was hoping a lot of you did. But here's the thing. This is based on the largest survey of student opinion ever done. And every year it's the largest survey ever done because we make it slightly bigger each year. And the 4 biggest databases of professor cancellations, student cancellations, deplatforming, and speech codes. And it's funny because when Harvard came in dead last year, we got a lot of huffing and puffing from Harvard people about oh, it's just a stunt. Until they actually looked at the data. I remember, and they said such Harvard-y things too about it. It was great. They were saying when we pointed out the professors who face cancellation at Harvard, I remember getting one response saying, well, those aren't very prestigious professors. And I was like, wow, okay. And someone else saying, it's kind of well, we have Harvard statisticians looking into this, and they think the methodology is bad. And I'm kind of we had a Harvard statistician help us make the freaking survey. So we'll answer your snobbery with also snobbery, but it's still snobbery. So these ones really, Harvard, just to put it in perspective, they got a negative 12. A negative 10.69, actually, 2 years ago. It was the first negative score we'd ever gotten in our history as we improved the methodology every year. This past year, they got a negative 20. So look at the schools that are in the last. I think it's funny that University of Southern California is in the bottom 10. I didn't do that on purpose, by the way. I forgot that USC was in the bottom. Now, these are the ones that actually do quite well. this was a bit of a surprise to me that University of Virginia came out number one. Michigan Technological University, not so much of a surprise. And you'll notice a lot of these are big state schools. So as to Jesse's question about like what should journalists do, they should be hiring journalists from big state schools, and actually not journalism majors. People actually work on the student newspaper. I say that as someone who worked on the student newspaper. But when I went and spoke at UVA, I had to be a little bit like, okay, calm down. You got a 73 out of 100. Let's not go nuts for getting a C minus. And because I wanted to bring that home, partially just to make the point that nobody's killing it in the United States in terms of being great for free speech. And I do think of academic freedom as a outgrowth of freedom of speech, a way of applying freedom of speech. This is a contentious in academic freedom circles. But these schools are doing things right. Now, interestingly, University of Virginia did actually shut down encampments the same way some of the schools that got really dinged for it by students. But the reason why UVA didn't get dinged for it by students is they clearly explain that you don't have an unlimited right to camp out on this campus. That's perfectly within First Amendment law. That's time, place, and manner restriction. And students, when they saw it was applied evenly, they went along with it. Whereas Barnard, which got the absolute bottom score, by the way, in terms of whether or not they trust the administration, couldn't make up its mind. Basically they had to ask, well, do we like the people camping out? So this is my contact information, and I'd love to take some questions. Well, there's still time.
Do we have somebody who's bringing the, okay, let's look around. Let's go way back there. Let's try way in the back.
Thank you, Greg. It's me. So I'm gonna ask
JJ
you.
Rauch?
I'm gonna ask you a question which you're professionally obliged not to answer, but we're all here among friends, so just whisper the truth in our ears, okay? I know you're not allowed to ding other organizations in the free speech space. Tell us what's happened at the AAUP and the ACLU and give us your true opinion. We promise we'll keep it strictly to ourselves.
So I worked at the ACLU back in 1999. It was my dream job. And the first day that I was there at the ACLU of Northern California, when I was talking about how proud I was to be at the ACLU, I got, and mentioned Skokie, I got dressed down by someone who was part of the staff there whose mission was gay rights, saying, well, we don't support harassment at the ACLU. I was like, I didn't mention anything about harassment. Like, what I'm talking about Skokie. I thought you guys were proud of that. So that was one of the reasons why when I graduated from Stanford, specializing in First Amendment. I took every class Stanford offered on First Amendment. This was my dream job. I did 6 credits on censorship during the Tudor dynasty, which anybody who's listened to it, I always talk about. I get excited about that shit. And so that was really disappointing. It's one of the reasons why I decided to work at FIRE rather than looking for a job at the ACLU after I graduated. Now, I will say there are great people at the ACLU who are great on free speech still. One of them is retiring, unfortunately, David Cole. I do think that there are things that they did wrong. Some of the things that makes FIRE different is we have a strong commitment to hiring people who actually disagree with each other and vote for different candidates. That's something like the liberals at FIRE get nervous if we don't have a conservative in the room to disagree with us. And I think that's incredibly healthy. And I think we also, in terms of like things, so we try to have viewpoint diversity. We have a crash this bus into a wall mentality that we'd rather die than be unprincipled, as an organization. That goes back to the Samuel Arian case actually. We don't throw our clients under the bus, and we have one issue area. So I think one thing that has hurt the ACLU is, one, they have no viewpoint diversity among their staff. That's bad. But they also have 19 different practice areas. And that actually led to them thinking that we can defend free speech, but we can't defend it for abortion protesters. And it's like, that's not even a hard one. Like, of course you can do both. That's crazy. Now, the American Association of University Professors is a little different. Hi, John Carl Wilson. And I wrote something called The Fall of the AAUP on my Substack that I would urge all of you to read. It is uncharacteristically angry from me because the AAUP has gone from being a not very effective defender of academic freedom to an actual threat to academic freedom. And one of the reasons why I got really animated about the idea yesterday that DEI statements aren't political litmus tests is because I think it's just obvious. Like, I talked to someone last night who was saying, I can't go to law school because I just can't fill one of those things out, even though she was by every definition about as diverse as a person gets. She on principle couldn't do it because she felt like she would be lying. So it's like the idea that it's not a political litmus test, and the AAUP came out behind it. It's just nuts. I think that they played this little joke where they tried to pretend that, boycotts are against academic freedom. The idea that we're going to boycott an institution or an individual professor on the basis of we're not going to deal with that professor if we don't like something related to their politics. And they tried to pretend. So basically, that's the correct position. Like, that's FIRE's position. It used to be the AAUP's position, is that boycotts are not okay with an academic freedom, with an open system of truth discovery. It's not consistent to say, well, we're now not going to work with this university because we don't like the politics of their country. That was the AAUP's position and ours up until recently. This past year, they decided to get rid of that, but also claimed that, this isn't about Israel. We're not, no. And then the head of the AUP, I think he's a Rutgers scholar, he, one of the first schools to actually pass something boycotting Israel was, of course, Rutgers. So even the university, the president of the AUP wasn't even being honest about this. And I think probably the most disturbing thing, and I actually will give credit to John Carl Wilson for this, the most ferocious attack on academic freedom I have read, period, I think, was Michael Barabay's and Jennifer Ruth's book called It's Not Free Speech. It is a sneering, painful read for anyone who actually knows what they're talking about. Apparently, by the way, Nicholas and Erica Christakis deserved what they had coming because they were provocateurs because they had actually defended freedom of speech at Harvard before they defended it at Yale. Yeah, that's their argument. They mentioned my friend Mike Adams, who killed himself after a cancel mob, as being a terrible, terrible story for University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And this is the argument that they made. They made the argument that, because he got a settlement, actually a relatively small settlement, that's going to encourage other conservatives to, quote unquote, follow in Mike Adams' footsteps. They were thinking they was getting a golden parachute. And by the way, they mentioned the man killed himself in an endnote. I think that's absolutely despicable. But I would say, worst of all, their argument in that book is that academic freedom's okay, I guess, but white supremacy must not be tolerated. And we should have a new exception to academic freedom for white supremacy. And if there was any question on whether or not they meant eugenics or something actually much more dramatic, they actually have a whole chapter defending critical race theory. Now, something we defend your right to teach. But if you're going with the critical race theory definition of white supremacy, you mean anything the left doesn't like. And I wanted to give some credit to John Carl Wilson and to Stanley Fish is that they actually debated. So I appreciate that, John. Barabay and Ruth on this topic at the AUP. But the AUP was promoting this book. And I'm like, no, that's a book you denounce. That's a book you say, this is insane. At a moment in which there is a conformity spiral, the idea that they would get behind a book that was saying, and by the way, we're not going far enough, there should be no academic freedom for white supremacy. So I think the AUP has a long way to go to find its road back, but here's the thing, I don't think they want to. I don't think they want to. And that's one of the big problems. And one of the things that does make me a little bit more sort of pessimistic about the future for academic freedom reform, higher ed reform, is that we want to fix things. We want to change things. I think a lot of top administrators, university presidents, genuinely do want to make things better. I think an awful lot of faculty want things to be more of the same and worse. as time goes on. And that's a very hard problem to solve. It's one of the reasons why I think a lot of it has to come from outside the academy, and you have to have counter institutions. You have to think long and hard about ways to fix it, because I mean, one of the most disturbing things that we found in our research was just the fact that younger professors are more ideological, they are less politically diverse, they are more hostile to academic freedom and freedom of speech. So if people think this problem is just going to go away, they're putting their heads in the sand. Now, in terms of what can be done, though, I do think that there are things that we could do. In Canceling the American Mind, I have a whole chapter at the end about things I think we could do to actually help academia. But to give you a sense of like how bad I think it's gotten, the very first thing I say is a lot fewer jobs should require a college degree. Like, that's number one. I also have talked about the idea, like, if there was some insanely difficult test that could prove that you read and understood everything that would have been in an old liberal arts curriculum, you know, from back when it was hard, you know, maybe like the 60s or something like that, when you had to read a lot of books. If you could pass that, then you get a super BA, like automatically. I think we need to be thinking about ways to, because it's partially what academia is going to try to do is they're going to try to make small, cosmetic changes around the edges that make people feel a little better, like the fever has passed, and then actually really change nothing. Because that's actually what happened after, because the amazing thing for me in my work with John Haidt to look into was that after 1995, when the first wave of political correctness had kind of crashed, that's when viewpoint diversity in hiring absolutely plummeted. That's when things got much worse. That's when you started having the first bias-related incident programs coming online. And I fear that it's just going to get worse next time around, and next sort of woke panic is going to be even worse. So thank you, John. I was more candid about that than I usually am.
Good. Let's see, who else? Yes, back there.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. I'm wondering where you, what? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Abby Thompson from UC Davis.
Hi, Abby Thompson.
Hi. I'm wondering where you get your mysterious confidence that university administrators are perhaps more inclined to support academic freedom and free speech, because I don't share it.
Well, really all I mean is that some university presidents realize that things have gone. What's that? Cyan Blaylock at Dartmouth, for example, you know, there are some that would like things to be better, and they're mostly complaining about how they find the faculty irresolvable. I'm not saying there's a lot, but I will say this: if people really stop going to some of these elite colleges in favor of ones in the South, which sounds like is actually happening, some of the schools that are a little bit better, big state schools are generally better on free speech by a lot. That would be a huge sign. Now, there was something kind of funny that happened after the Dobbs decision, where a lot of people on the left were saying, like as if it would be like owning the conservatives or something like that, now they should go after legacy admissions. And I'm like, that would be amazing. And here's why. The sort of ruling class of the United States, I always sound like a Marxist when I talk about this stuff, but they're addicted to these schools. How obsessed people, Penn alumni are about Penn, for example, it just blows me away. Like they love it. It's paradise, and it has to be saved. And I always talk about, you know, just the idea that, like, well, let's say that you pass a rule saying at this school we're no longer going to allow anybody whose parents went to Penn to go to Penn. And that would mean that the most influential parents in the country would suddenly have to send their kids to other schools. I think the extent to which that would erode the monopolistic-like power that some of these elite schools have, it would be absolutely amazing. So I was like, by all means, that would be great. But it is weird, like the extent to which I do see a lot of this as fundamentally corrupt. You know, like the idea that kind of like, we just kind of wink and nod at the idea that if you're a massive donor to some of these schools, oh, they're just doing that because they want their grandkids to get in. And you're like, they're just doing that because they want their grandkids to get in. So yeah, we're fighting a giant industry that I think we need to be poking holes in a lot of creative different ways. Unfortunately, Harvard's still going to be here in 100 years. I mean, if it's better, then not so unfortunately. So we can't give up on reform as well, but reform is just one part of the larger hope for, and to be clear, I don't as much care about academia as I care about knowledge production. We have badly damaged our ability to trust the knowledge we're producing, and we need to be addressing that through a variety of creative means. I think we should have done a much better job of choosing scholars based on integrity. I think the idea of having too many non-falsifiable topics in the first place is a problem. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm really, and actually as we're ending up, I'm very happy to work with Heterodox Academy, very happy, hopefully the FIRE's gonna try to step up our higher education reform work, very happy to work with University of Austin. We're thinking about actually doing a symposium on how AI, could actually potentially help solve some of the knowledge production problems. But we have to be thinking big and hard, and we can't give up on the larger goal. The larger goal is not saving academia. The larger goal is making sure that we educate Americans well and that we have a reliable system of knowledge production. And by the way, and this bring it full circle to what I do, and that's impossible without freedom of speech.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tzvi Shalem from Israel. If a person says, I don't believe in knowledge production, I don't believe in trying to maximize the connection between an idea
You're trying to make me cry, aren't you?
and reality, should he be accepted into the university as a, researcher? Should he or not?
So David Raban is a scholar who I actually really respect, who wrote a book on academic freedom. Even he, unfortunately, concludes that maybe schools should have anti-hate speech codes in his most recent book. And it's like, great. Even like someone like who's actually shown some integrity is saying that speech codes, let's try them again, even though they haven't worked well so far, which he recognizes. In that book, he also says that scholars who don't believe in truth, that's fine. It's like, I don't even know where to start with that. Like essentially, if something is because if basically what you're saying is non-falsifiable, and I always point this out to people who claim that objective truth doesn't exist. And it's kind of like, okay, do you believe everything's true? Do you believe there's no such thing as falsity? And nobody believes there's no such thing as falsity. And it's like, well, then you believe in truth. And let me explain how. Because nobody really thinks about epistemology, thinks that you can easily, a lot of us think of the objective world as out there, but you can't know objective truth. You can just be reasonably certain within certain parameters that you're close to it. And the way you get there is by chopping out all the falsity around it. So you might end up with 1% of the sky left over of possible answers. And the truth is somewhere in there. So the argument that objective truth doesn't exist, it's just a weird, lazy argument that has been so sort of corrosive to the endeavor of higher ed. It's one of the reasons why, nobody so many fewer people actually trust academics these days. So I think the idea if you're not coming in, but one thing I really liked about David Raban's book is that he said really the only legitimate justification for academic freedom is knowledge production, is the search for truth, and I completely agree with him on that. Robert Post had something about democratic legitimation and talking about academic freedom's value to the common good in a democracy, and it's kind of like, I don't know how that argument works in a situation where you can make an argument that academia is worse for democracy, that essentially creates a now increasingly badly educated elite that runs our lives in increasingly poor ways. Anyway.
Okay.
One more question?
Yeah, let's do one more. Very good. Let's see, whose hand? I skipped over some people. Back there. Last one.
I'm Barry Honig from Columbia, and as usual,
Hi.
We still don't match Harvard. We're only number 2, and that's.
And you guys tried so hard this year.
Try. We try.
I thought you'd get it.
Their endowment is just too big. Anyway, that's why I want them taxed, and that's part of my question.
Yeah.
So it's illegal to ban DEI statements. Does it violate anything, if any law, if the governor or if the government cuts off money to programs because they have, or to universities because they have DEI statements? Because I think something like that is about to happen in one way or another. So is that also unconstitutional?
It just depends on how it's structured, essentially. Because basically, like, one of the reasons why, and I share John's reservations about ever recommending legislation, but if you're having political litmus tests in higher ed, that's antithetical to the point of why it has nonprofit status in the first place. So an easier answer is, could the federal government tomorrow say, listen, we're not giving public funding to any school that has speech codes? They could do that. They could tie federal funding to that. That's what California does, by the way. California actually has the Leonard Law, and they tie state funding to, and they limit it to non-sectarian schools and say, you can have speech codes there. So particularly if your argument is something that's a part and parcel, saying that they're doing something that actually undermines the essential function of the university's role as educators and truth seekers, then yeah, that probably wouldn't. They probably would bring a First Amendment lawsuit against it, but I think they would lose.
I know I have the mic, so I'm going to ask you one more question.
Excellent.
So what can Columbia do to beat Harvard? Or actually to separate ourselves from Harvard, which would be even better.
Oh man, I don't want to end on such a dark note. I was asked by someone what could be done. I was in a room full of people talking to a big donor to Columbia about things that could be done about the problem on campus. And a lot of the other people were suggesting, we need multicultural potlucks where people talk across lines of difference and share food. And they were coming up with all these kind of little, or either expensive, basically doubling down on DEI, just making it better somehow, or these other little projects. And I was kind of like, if I had infinite power over Columbia, I would say we're a technology school now. That's how far gone I think Columbia is. Yeah.
Okay, we did it on a dark note there, but thank you, Greg. Thank you. This is excellent.